My name is Bill Sanders. Welcome to tonight. This is the SFA's foray into Social Media Week. How many of you are here because you found out about this because of Social Media Week? Wow. How many here for the first time to know, because this is Social Media Week, we have a different hashtag. You can see it right here on the front and around on the walls. So when you check in, when you tweet, when you post on Facebook, if you'd use that, we'd appreciate it. Want to make sure we're supporting those guys very well. And we're also very interested in having you check in tonight at Foursquare. In Foursquare, we have our very own check-in location now, sfAMA.
And so without further ado, I want to introduce Jacob to the podium. So thank you.
Thank you. Of what customer engagement would look like if you started bringing in other pieces into play other than social data. Right, so in this diagram, and this is supposed to be designed as a baseline diagram. So typically, if I run a workshop, for example, and there are people in the room, I have them draw their own and say, tell me how you get community data into your systems. What does it look like? Some people have more than one CRM system. So the point of putting something like this up there is for you to visually be able to understand and write down what this looks like. So in this scenario, typically we have a community which exists either online or offline. We're getting information either through social channels or through traditional channels. That data goes to a listening tool into our CRM system. Then it goes to our social CRM team that decides on how to respond. We choose if we're going to respond to the individual or to a community. We look at the rules that we're going to use before we respond, and then we respond. And all that information gets captured into a system. Right? That's the big problem that we see today, is that these conversations take place, but there is no way to track them, to map them, and to tie them to anything other than organization starts at a different point. Right? Some initiatives come out of PR, some initiatives come out of marketing, some initiatives come from your CEO. How do you follow a step 1, 2, and 3 process when these initiatives start in different places of the company? Every company has different problems that they're faced with. So instead of looking at this and saying, oh, these are the 5 things we need to work on, look at this as, which one of these do we need to work on? So these are typically the 5 things that we see. And as an organization, it's important to understand which one of these you are good at and which one of these you need help with. Some organizations are very good at organizational culture and technology, but they're weak at process. They don't have governance set up. Others have 3 of the 5, others have 4 of the 5. So it's important to understand and define where you need help or where you don't. A big frustration that companies have in the social business space is that they are sold everything, right? You are pushed, vendors are pushing everything on you. In order to become a social business, you need collaboration, you need social customer engagement, you need everything. It's not necessarily true. And we're going to talk about a framework on how to assess that in just a minute. So I've been spending the last few months, and actually the last little while, doing a lot of work in supply chain management and researching supply chain management and reading supply chain management. And I found a really interesting framework for evaluating risk, which I think is very applicable to the social business space, which I wanted to share. So, and this is called the failure mode and effects analysis. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that. It's a very technical term. I have no idea what it means. But the concept is very, very simple. So what you do is you put down some of your risks that you have. I made up 2 risks here. Risk 1, employees don't use our tools internally. Risk 2, we get negative feedback from customers. So you want to assess this on a couple elements. The first element is, how severe is that? How severe is it that employees don't use our tools? Is it not a big deal? Is it a big deal? So you put down a number on a scale of 1 to 10. Here I put an 8, there I put a 6, I just made up the numbers. The next thing you want to assess is the probability of occurrence. How likely is it, do you think, that employees won't use your tools? Or how likely is it that you're going to get negative customer feedback? Chances are in the social media space, it's 100% that you're going to get negative customer feedback. Next thing is probability of early detection. So how likely is it that you're going to find out about this problem early? Are you going to find out about it within a few hours? If you're using a monitoring tool, chances are probability of early detection for negative feedback is a 10, right? Next is the priority index, where you multiply these 3 things together, and you get a score. And that score then lets you prioritize how you're going to map your risks. So it's a very simple framework for you to use to prioritize which risks you're going to go after. Once you prioritize your risks, you can look at 2 things. The recommended action for how you're going to deal with the risk, and who's responsible for owning it. So again, this was taken from the supply chain space, but I think it's a very simple and applicable way for people in the social media and the social business world to evaluate and prioritize risk. It's a very simple. I told you I wasn't a big fan of step 1, step 2, step 3 because it doesn't really make sense. So instead, we made it very simple. Assess what you have, assess what you want, develop a strategy for how to get it, set up metrics, iterate and adapt. And I'll give you an example of what that looks like and what that means. So next is develop a strategy. How are we going to do that? Select the technology solution, integrate the data and the technology, find evangelists, deploy the tool, and start training. Now again, this is kind of a, this is simple because I wanted to fit these things into the bullets. Of course, it gets a little bit, this wouldn't be your whole blueprint for, show this to the CEO and say, hey, we're ready. Next is metrics. Company morale, qualitative metric. Cost savings on travel. Number of product ideas that we come up with. Revenue, adoption, and usage. Next is iterate and adapt. So how do we deal with upgrades and new features? Let's look at what's working and what isn't. What other problems exist? And then again, you go back to the top, which is, what do we have? Right, so does that framework, seriously, I want you guys to tell me if that framework kind of makes sense for how to approach it. Right? None of this like, step 1, deploy community, step 2, get on Twitter, step 3, go on Facebook. We're trying to look at this from a business problem as a whole, right? Like, we don't want to focus on the specific channel. The tools that we use are simply tools. Right? We're here to solve a particular business problem, so we need to know what that business problem is. So social business isn't a state, right? It's not an end game. Your organization isn't going to be a social business. And instead, what social business is, it's the acknowledgement that culture and technology are changing and have changed, and that organizations can leverage these changes to solve business problems. So all we're doing is solving the same problems that have always existed, that will always exist, but in the context of how culture and technology has changed. Emergence of new technologies and culture. Key theme, culture, technology. How we behave as people has changed. The tool that we use have also changed. Next, acknowledge these changes to solve problems. After that, understand and evaluate risk. So it's important to put this into perspective for how you evaluate risk. And your legal and your compliance people will love this stuff. They'll be very happy that you do this. And next is actually solving the problems. So thank you very much. Hopefully that put a little bit of context around the social business space. I know it's a lot. Social business is a very big space. You say, we are looking to branch into a new market for kids that are between the ages of 18 to 24. You'll know what tools you should be using for that specific demographic. I honestly think a lot of the problems that companies are having is they were so quick. It's very easy to create a Twitter account and a Facebook page, right? It takes 2 minutes, right? A lot of organizations dip their toe in the water, and now they're going more in that sort of wrong, not necessarily wrong direction, but kind of parallel direction. And they get very excited by followers and by comments, but they still haven't defined the problem that they're looking to solve. Instead, what happens is you get an ad hoc solution, like, oh, hey, well, by the way, we just made 10K. Okay, was that even something that we were trying to do? Right? Was revenue a goal that we were trying to go after? So that's the challenge that a lot of companies have, is they started getting involved and they start to see some successes here and there, but they still don't know the problem that they're looking to solve. I'll be over there. There's going to be books over there if anybody's interested in buying one. And those books, it's a social media 101 book for business. We tried to keep it simple. We wrote it, I think, in 2009. But it's just a very good kind of overview, very simple, of how to approach social.
Thank you so much, Jacob.
Thank you.